Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of whatever gender you prefer. Welcome to one more B3 talk. And it's a wonderful pleasure for me to host Franklin Leonard. It is great to be connected directly to Los Angeles. My name is Johannes Grenzfurtner. I'm an artist and filmmaker. Just premiered my last horror film at Fantastic Fest a couple of weeks ago, so that's fine. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about Franklin and his work. So just give to give you a brief overview what he's doing. He is a film and television producer and entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of The Blacklist, and that's a yearly publication featuring Hollywood's most popular unproduced screenplays, and that's something super interesting to talk about. He's a graduate of Harvard University, and he was the recipient of the 2019 Writers Guild of America Evelyn Berkey Award, and that's for, I quote, for elevating the honor and dignity of screenwriters. And most of the time, there is no honor and no dignity in screenwriting, and I know that myself. And I really would like to jump right in and tell us a little bit about, because there is, of course, a difference between screenwriters in Europe and screenwriters in the US. But could you tell us a little bit about the main or major problems? Where is the dignity really where there's no dignity at screenwriting in the US?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would argue that there's an inherent dignity in storytelling of all forms, and that includes screenwriters. I think that where the sort of failure of dignity is, if there is any, is in the way that the industry treats screenwriters. There's an assumption in the industry that the writer is sort of there to sort of lay out the groundwork for the way the story will happen. And you thank them for their service. Perhaps you hire another writer to rewrite the script. You can iterate that process as many times as you see fit. But at a certain point, the script is going to be handed to a director, handed to actors, handed to a studio and distributor that can do what they please with it. And that there's sort of no need for the original writer or the original creator of the material to continue to be involved. Look, I think that at the end of the day, a lot of these, resolving a lot of these creative problems is sort of a event-specific question. But I think as a general rule, it's good business and sort of good cultural practice to involve the people who were the original imaginers of whatever a thing is going to be. And in this case, in the case of movies and television, it's the writer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the time I have the feeling that there's this quote by the writer of Alien, and he says the most unimportant guy on a film set is the director. And I would probably not sign that completely, but there is strangely really an enormous pressure also, and an enormous public eye on the director of a film. And almost no one is talking about the script, and that's where all, as you say, the Imagineering comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that saying that the director is the least important person on set certainly undervalues directors as well. And I've been lucky enough to work with great directors, who add substantially to the work of a writer and do a phenomenal job of coordinating all the elements of what becomes a movie. I think the fundamental thing that we just, as an industry, have to recognize is that film is an inherently collaborative business. Short of maybe Bo Burnham doing his Netflix special during the pandemic, it requires more than one person to execute these things that we want to execute. And I just think it's important that we appropriately value all of the contributions that everyone makes. And certainly a writer, in being the person who goes into a room alone or with other writers and wills worlds into existence, and that no one else has anything really to do until a writer does their work, deserves more credit, both in terms of sort of cultural cachet and social influence, but also pure financial compensation than they're currently receiving now. Having been a producer on set, I'd argue that maybe the producer is the least important person on set.
Okay, so it seems that in this, as you say, filmmaking is problem solving, and filmmaking, and you see that here. I just cut myself on a film set, whatever. Yeah, and it is also a team sport, And it seems that in the whole entity of film production, it seems the least team players seem to be the writers, because they are just sitting at home writing their thing, and most of the time there is a strange animosity going on, or some strange misconceptions that the writers are just finishing their product and giving it out of their hands, and suddenly it disappears into completely out of their control. Is this really like that, as strong, or is this almost like a caricature that I'm presenting?
I think it's a caricature, but that accentuates the most extreme features of a dynamic. I think it is definitely true that for most writers, they are not involved in the production of their films, right? So on some level, especially at the studio level, you finish your script, you pass it along. Maybe if you have a relationship with the director or producer, you're invited to be a part of the production process in terms of flipping pages and making adjustments based on producerial realities or director or actor preferences in the moment. There are exceptions. All the productions that I've had, the writer has been intimately involved in the producing process. That for me is, again, a matter of ethics, but it's also a matter of, I think it's the best business model. Why would you not want the person who originally conceived of a film to be involved in carrying it through when you're actually shooting the film? But no, there are plenty of American writers that can attest to the fact that they have no exposure to the actual making of their thing, and the next time they were directly addressed about it was on the red carpet of their movie premiere.
Mm-hmm. So contractually, for all the people out there who don't know about the details of filmmaking, so as a writer, you pretty much contractually kind of sign away your possibility to interfere or something like that, because there are always these stories, you see the making of Blade Runner or whatever it is, and you always hear the stories when the director decides to change the ending of the film or change this or that, and suddenly your name is on screen, but maybe you haven't even done
That's right.
something. Yeah.
The dynamic is pretty straightforward. When a producer or a film financier, distributor purchases your script, you no longer own it, right? The authorship that I understand is retained for the most part in Europe doesn't exist in the U.S. context. So if I write a screenplay, when I option it to a studio or a producer, it means that they control the rights to it for 18 months or so, 24 months. And then when the movie goes into production, they own the rights to that intellectual property and can do with it what they see fit.
Mm-hmm. So you sign the contract, you hand the thing over, and what would kind of in an optimal world, or something that you are fighting for, what would be, is it just something that, do we need better agreements to facilitate that the team play is also including the writers, or do we really actually need to change something in the copyrights, in the laws, or something like that, or is it just something that we need a better etiquette, let's call it?
It's a good question. Again, I think that the reality is that as historically, you had a sort of oligopolistic dynamic where there were very few distributors, very few sort of people that could afford to make and distribute content to the world, or at least by territory, U.S., various places in Europe. And so, the sort of negotiation leverage wasn't terribly strong. If I'm a writer and I say, you know what, I would like to own part of the copyright of this, I would like to own equity in this thing that I created, the 5 or 6 studios could just say, that's not how we do things. No. And then you either choose not to sell it, or you sacrifice the copyright or your desire for ownership in order to get the thing made. I think in a sort of technologically enabled world where you have a proliferation of a lot of different outlets for distribution, and that could theoretically compete for the rights to a writer's creation or any artist's creation, I think there may be more leverage, but I think that, again, it's all sort of comes out in the wash. If a writer wants to negotiate for an equity part of their project, they should do so aggressively. In the American context, that's incredibly rare, and you basically would need some serious negotiating leverage in order to make that happen. I'm not a copyright expert. I haven't studied the implications of a radical change in sort of American copyright. But again, I do know that, as a fundamental rule, the film industry would be better off by better compensating writers. So even if they're taking ownership of it, I think a lot of people are willing to see ownership of things if they're well compensated for that ownership. And I think that that's probably the best path to the industry to better financial outcomes and frankly, better creative outcomes as well.
It's interesting because in Europe, we have many strong unions in many fields. For example, in Austria, but there is almost hardly no union in the film industry, but there is hardly an Austrian film industry. It's like there are not that many actors, not actors, but there are not that many like people in the Austrian film industry. If I hear stories about active unions, and unions are very, very strict and also really doing a good job in the US, you hear it from the movie industry. So how did that happen? That the unions in the movie industry are so strong in the US, and in other fields they're so weak.
Well, again, not a labor historian, and so I don't know that it's true that they're weak. I think that there's, again, the reality of sort of late stage capitalism is that we have, a desperate need for laborers to gather and, gather their relative power so that they can engage in organized negotiation with the, entities that employ them. I think that certainly it's a little bit easier when your union is filled with highly recognizable, borderline celebrities, or at least a percentage of them is. It's a great deal easier to elicit sympathy for those folks, right? So SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, has a great deal of power in Hollywood. I'm certain that that's not unrelated to the fact that many members of SAG are people that would be recognized if they walk down the street, whereas IATSE, which is currently engaged in a very, a very serious negotiation over labor conditions, has a harder time in eliciting the support of the public. So again, I think that fundamentally what this comes down to is a negotiation between two, poles of power. In one case, you have a few corporations and a lot of money. In another case, you have large numbers of people that allow those companies to make money through their labor. And when they can unite and gather, they're far more powerful than they would ever be negotiating individually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go and talk about the Blacklist. Could you tell us a little bit about how it came into being, and maybe let's start with that. Like, how did you come up with the idea and start it?
So in 2005, I was working for Leonardo DiCaprio's film production company, Appian Way. My job as a junior executive was to find good screenplays and more importantly, good writers who could write the things that Leo would either star in or produce. And I found myself really frustrated because most of the things that I was reading they weren't great. They were sort of fell in that category of mediocre to good. And there are a lot of scripts that are sort of in that category, but that's not enough, for me as a junior executive to walk into my boss's office, slap it down on his desk and say, read this tonight. We need to make this movie. And that's really the goal, right? Something that we can feel passionate about, that we want to push the ball up the hill, push the rock up the hill for a decade, which oftentimes is how long it takes for these things to get made, even with Leo attached. And so, late one night in November 2005, I was in my office. I knew that I needed to figure out how to find good screenplays. And I took a survey of 75 of my peers and said, send me a list of your favorite unproduced screenplays. In exchange, I'll share with you the combined list. Ran it through a Excel pivot table, output it to PowerPoint, and published this list as something called the Blacklist. And it went viral very quickly in the industry at a very early time in sort of online digital life. So, Facebook was in 10 schools. There was no Twitter. There was no Instagram. iPhones didn't exist yet. But all of a sudden,
there was no YouTube.
YouTube had been around, I think, for 3 or 4 months. And I remember that because there was a viral video that I kept getting emails about, and every time I go to the YouTube link, that had been taken down. And it was my first real awareness, sort of simultaneous to the Blacklist coming out, that the technology and video online was going to change the way the industry functioned. But all the scripts on this list were being read, and when they were being read, they were, getting very positive response, including from me. And so everyone was like, where did this list come from? These writers are amazing. And then about 6 months into 2004 or 2006, an agent called me pitching a client and tried to claim to me that this script was going to be #1 on next year's Blacklist, which was interesting because I had done it anonymously and I wasn't going to do it again. But this was a sort of indication to me that this thing that I created had value Because if the speculative notion of a script being on the list was something that an agent could use to sell the script, then clearly the scripts that were actually on the list were having significant benefits from it. And that's true. Look, there have been about 1,200 scripts in the list in the last 16 years. About a third of them have been made. They've made about $27 billion in worldwide box office. They have basically won 4 of the last 13 Best Picture Oscars, 14 of the last 28 screenwriting Oscars. And Harvard Business School did a study that found that movies made from scripts in the Blacklist make 90% more, controlling for all other factors in revenue, than movies made from scripts not on the Blacklist. And so, I think what we've done is, prove the thesis that good screenwriting gives you the best chance at successful movie making, which I think we all know fundamentally, that the best business plan is to start with a great script and make a great movie. But I think we forget that oftentimes, especially in Hollywood. So that was sort of the annual survey. And then, by 2010, this notion of a once yearly PDF that circulated via email had become rather quaint. It was important to me that we launch something a little bit more ambitious. And in 2012, literally almost exactly 9 years ago today, we launched a website that allows everyone on Earth to upload a screenplay in the English language, have that script evaluated, and if it's good, we tell everyone in Hollywood, hey, this is a really good screenplay, you should do something with it. And we've seen hundreds of writers get signed by major agencies and management companies, dozens of writers get their movies produced. And yeah, it's a really efficient marketplace for screenwriting and screenwriting talent that really functions like a metal detector in a field full of haystacks with everyone on their hands and knees looking for needles.
So who are the people who submit screenplays? Are there like already established people as well, or are they kind of like indie people? Because I know the story, like so many people are very scared, like intellectual property, someone might steal my script and all that stuff. So how is that going?
Yeah, intellectual property wise, but I'll answer the first question first. It runs the gamut in terms of who's submitting to the site. It literally, you can have the least experienced screenwriter on earth who's writing in the English speaking language will upload their script and seek feedback from our readers so that they can know, okay, this is the standard of expectation at a professional level. Here's the gap between where the standard is and where I am, and here's what I can do to try to get better. And then we have, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this without giving anybody any names. Let's say we have Academy Award nominated screenwriters using the website to give objective feedback or non-biased feedback on their intermediate drafts. So it runs the gamut. What I would say is that we have designed the website specifically to protect writers and make sure that we're doing no harm, so that anybody who downloads a script, suffice it to say, there's little digital code embedded in those downloads so we can track literally every script that's been downloaded. So if I ever stumble onto a draft of something that's been downloaded from the website, I know by whom and when. And the fact of the matter is that, it's virtually impossible to steal a screenplay without there being legitimate recourse. Ideas are not copyrightable. Screenplays are. And so, once you've completed a screenplay and upload it to our site, the only people that have access to that script within our ecosystem are industry professionals who actually have the ability to advance somebody's career or their project as a day-to-day part of doing their business. And suffice it to say that we don't tolerate any bad behavior. It's not 3 strikes, you're out. It's one and done. If you are behaving in a way that is deleterious to screenwriters individually or the writing community as a whole, you are no longer welcome in the Blacklist community.
Okay. Is it possible for you to kind of like pick out 1 or 2 stories, like kind of like, it sounds so strange, but success stories that came out of the Blacklist?
Absolutely. I'll say, well, here's probably my favorite. So I grew up in West Central Georgia in the US, which is very, very far from Hollywood. And shortly after I launched the website, a husband and wife who had never made a feature film, they made like 1 or 2 shorts. They were doing like literally local television ads, uploaded a low budget screenplay to the website. And it got very high scores. And shortly thereafter, they signed with a manager in Hollywood. And then they got an incoming phone call from someone who said they were a producer from Image Nation, Abu Dhabi. And they said, hey, listen, we loved your script. What are you doing with the Arabic language rights? And they said, this is a practical joke, and hung up the phone. So they called back and they said, listen, no, seriously, we've been looking to do a genre movie in the Emirates. We love your script as a basis for it. We'd want to make some changes to sort of like abide by sort of cultural mores here, but we think we can adapt this. Can we pay you for the Arabic language rights to your script? And they said, well, if the money's real, absolutely. That movie ended up being produced by Imagination Abu Dhabi. The title of it is Zimzana. It premiered at the London Film Festival. It ended up being Netflix's first ever Arabic language acquisition. And the writers are now signed at a major agency in Hollywood, as is the Emirati director of that movie, Majid Al-Ansari. And so that's happening. And again, it's and they still live outside of Atlanta, Georgia. In the non-COVID times, they still go to Abu Dhabi on a regular basis to help advise Imagination's projects because they had such a good experience there. And they're developing other things with representation, which was not possible in a pre-internet, pre-Blacklist stage. I'll give you another example. So we have a screenwriters lab every year where we bring the best 6 to 8 screenwriters that we find on the website. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you. Or whatever you say if you're an atheist, like atheist blessings from me.
We can cut that out if necessary.
Oh, sure we can. Yes.
So, we have every year we take the best 6 to 8 writers we find on the Blacklist website, and we bring them out to Los Angeles, all expenses paid, for a sort of professional incubation lab. And there was a writer who had written a script that got very high scores on the site, from Chicago, Illinois. No 4-year university, no, I believe maybe 1 semester of college, worked at a men's clothing store. Nothing on his resume suggested that he had the infrastructure necessarily to support him as a screenwriter. And in our interview for the lab, I asked him point blank, how do you get feedback? Like, where does your community of artists that allows you to sort of continue to improve your work? Because obviously it's gotten quite good. He's like, honestly, I talk to my coworkers at the clothing store, and if they get bored by what I'm telling them I'm working on, I know I'm on the wrong track. Right? So this is a person who is just a storyteller, who's found the screenwriting forum, has no direct connection to the industry, but just on the basis of his merits, we were able to find him sort of, again, amidst the fields full of haystacks. Here's a needle. Went through the lab, did very, very well. And I got an email just last week saying that he had been signed by a legitimate Hollywood manager who often has writers who are on the annual list every year. So again, I think the goal, my assumption is that there's great talent around the world when it comes to screenwriting. But that talent doesn't necessarily have the social relationships to get to Hollywood, or the financial wherewithal to pick up their life and move to Los Angeles and sort of work in a coffee shop until that they can get someone to pay attention to them. And it's important for them that there's a talent recruitment process that gives them an opportunity to show their merit and then have opportunities that befit that merit. But it's arguably more important to Hollywood that we have that talent recruitment infrastructure. It's in the same way that football teams try to scout all around the world to find the best talent, because they know that having the best talent on their team will allow them to be most successful. So too, the film industry should be doing that, because there's a lot of talent out there that the industry's overlooked for as long as it's existed. And really, we're the ones that are paying that price in terms of, great films that weren't made and frankly, money that wasn't made.
Mm-hmm. So there is always, and I mean, I know a little bit about the film industry, but there is always, at least for people outside the film industry, there seems to be this dishwasher suddenly is a millionaire story is always embedded in the whole thing. Yeah, you're being discovered and stuff like that. And of course, it's not really working like that. So, but it seems that also Hollywood in general is kind of likes that myth in a certain way. So how do you tackle that? I mean, it's just it's a job. I mean, but I'm not sure it will make you a millionaire all the time.
I think I think the overnight success story is a part of the American myth, right? The American dream. But does it happen? Absolutely. Sure. There are people who are sort of working regular day jobs who write a screenplay, and that screenplay gets sold, and that person has 7 figures in their bank account overnight. That happens single-digit times a decade, if that, right? Probably I can count the number of times on my hand. More realistically, success is a product of hard work. and resilience. And most of the people that are working in Hollywood are not millionaires. They are people, they're middle-class people who are working hard, oftentimes in very long hours, much longer than 8-hour days, oftentimes without, with a rolling lunch. And and if you're working on a set, you're often in very dangerous physical environments. So, yes, there are celebrities. Those are the stories we hear. That is a product of a media cycle that wants to, create and burnish this myth because that's what people are interested in, and everybody has that dream. The reality is, most people that work in Hollywood work very, very hard for very little reward, and still consider themselves lucky to do so. I think that's a lot. That's a lot of what these union negotiations are about. We are working hard. We are putting in this work, and yes, we work in a desirable industry. But at the end of the day, these are jobs that deserve to be compensated and respected, and provided safety measures that befit our humanity, not the celebrity of the people we happen to be supporting.
Mm-hmm. So you read a lot of scripts, and what I've seen, especially in recent years, is that many scripts follow a certain formula, like save the cat, like the beat structure, all that stuff. So in a certain way, like most people, almost like drawing by numbers or something like that, most people could just like come up with a very functioning, working 3-act structure and that kind of stuff. So is that something that like a Hollywood professional would immediately see and say like, oh wow, someone did the save the cat thing again? Or is this just like somehow embedded anyways, and the matter is like what you tickle out of this formula?
It's a good question. I think it's more the latter. Look, I think that there are some inherent things about storytelling that extend far. Look, film's been around for just over 100 years. There are some inherent realities of storytelling that have been around for an order of magnitude or more years than that. When people talk about a 3-act structure, there's this sort of highly rigid approach to that, which is first act ends on page 30, second act ends roughly page 90, and then the second act is like roughly 60 pages long. Really what we're talking about when we say a 3-act structure is a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? That the story starts, that the action ramps up, there's a lot of action, there's a climax and a denouement, and the story's over. I think that's no different than any story that we might tell if we're at an airport bar talking to somebody and saying, this crazy thing happened to me, this and this and this and this happened, it built towards this, and then this was the result. That's a story. I think the reality is, for industry professionals, and frankly for audience members, we've seen enough, we've consumed enough of the sort of like basic story structure that we know what to expect, right? Now, as somebody who works in the industry professionally, who for some period of time was reading between 500 and 1,000 scripts a year, I may be a little bit better trained about what to expect when I see certain story elements. The things that distinguish themselves, the things that are more likely to get made, the writers that are more likely to have opportunities are those who are aware that those story structures exist and are able to manipulate them to make me see the world with new eyes or experience a story that I haven't seen before, right? It's a little bit like fine art. If you look at someone like Piet Mondrian, for example, right? Like he started doing very photorealistic haystacks and then moved through Impressionism. And once he'd sort of mastered the representational idea, then he began to abstract on representational ideas to introduce his audience to a new way of seeing the world. And I think that that's really true of storytelling as well. Ideally, what you're doing is saying, okay, we all know what the rules are. We all know what you're expecting. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and you're going to, and every single step of the way, you're going to be enraptured by everything I say. You're going to be worried about what happens next. And when it's over, you're going to wish that you could spend more time in that story universe that I just told you. That's the goal. Whatever you need to do to accomplish that, you should do it. But in so doing, you have to be aware of the fact that our human brains are wired a particular way, that storytelling is a lineage that has gone back millennia, and there are probably things that inform how you would approach telling that story that would be valuable for you.
Do you see differences? Because, I mean, you're obviously, like, as you said, you read so many screenplays. Are there differences? Like, taking the basic story structure kind of like a little bit out of the loop now, but are there differences in different cultures and different ethnicities to tell stories and what they emphasize on?
Absolutely. And I think that those differences reflect, other cultural realities in those environments, right? Some of it is, there's an economic explanation for some of those differences in culture, right? Like we spoke earlier about the copyright issue with regard to writers. In a in an environment where writers don't control their copyright, they lose a lot of power. And so there's a shift in the focus to what is the purpose of this thing. If the thing is owned by a corporation, the goal is more likely to be profit. If the thing is owned by an individual, it is more likely to be art. Those things are never exclusive one way or the other. It is just, corporations have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders and stakeholders. Artists have a different set of priorities. But I also think that there are just cultural realities about what various cultures are fixated on. It's no different than looking at sort of the musical realities of culture, right? Every culture has music of some sort. There are lots of overlaps in those music. And if you sort of look at any of the sort of YouTube videos that put various cultures that are on opposite sides of the world and their music next to each other, you're like, oh, there's some basic things that bond us together that make us sort of get up and dance, right? But at the same time, there are specificities, there are historical lineages that people were working within. And frankly, I think that's the beauty of art. One of the reasons I love cinema is that when I was a young boy in Columbus, Georgia, I could watch a movie from anywhere in the world and get a glimpse through somebody else's eyes on what their world looked like. And so I'm very pro that heterogeneity. I think it's critical that we preserve it. And frankly, I think that a critical part of the broader success of an artistic culture, both creatively and financially, is that heterogeneity, and we all benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jordan Peele said in an interview like a year or two ago that he has seen so many. He has pretty much seen all the stories there are. He kind of almost I'm not sure. I'm not quoting him exactly, but he kind of said I've seen all the movies already. I would like to see them again with Black people. What do you say about that?
Yeah, well, I think what he means there, look, if you look at the history of Hollywood, Black people, and frankly, many marginalized communities have been virtually non-present, and when they've been present, they've been sort of represented in a way that I don't think anybody responsible can consign. Look, the first Hollywood blockbuster was Birth of a Nation, which was largely responsible for the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan and the death of literally tens of thousands of Black people. And though we're not making Birth of a Nation anymore, there's tons of statistics that, Black folks are misrepresented as sort of as violent criminals even today. I think what Jordan is saying is that there's an opportunity. Well, look, I think he's saying two things. One, and this is a sort of, said so often, it's almost a cliche, that there are no new stories, there's just the remix, right? And, whether it's George Pulte's idea that there are only 38 dramatic situations, but, in the history of thousands of years of storytelling, are there any purely new stories? I doubt it. There's a lot of human experiences. And if we're able to sort of capture all of those in stories, there shouldn't be that much new in terms of piece A, has this conflict with piece B that results in C and D and E. I think that as the world changes, though, the advent of technology, a heterogeneous populations in various countries, we're able to see these stories through new eyes and new contexts, and that brings new meaning to them over and over and over and over again. And so, when I think about films like Get Out, when I think about films like Her, when I think about, the various ways in which technology and our relationship to technology is going to be explored in storytelling and narrative over the next couple of decades, I think we will continue to see stories that feel new, even if they rest on a foundation of storytelling that, again, goes back millennia. And I think we're better off for it, because I think that we can track how the human experience has changed in part by who we tell stories about, how we choose to tell them, and what meaning we derive from them in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I would like to, it's a premiere on our program, because for the first time, ever, we got two questions from our viewers for you specifically, and I really have to read them to you because they are actually a little bit long, but I'll read them to you. Okay, so and I think this question is probably like a good fit for what you just talked about, Franklin. And that's by Rodney Charles. Franklin, there often seems to be an interesting space separating true originality in story from the representation of black, cis, male archetypes on screen, at least in a way that would be challenging to how most people, including POCs, have often learned to accept and support our images. Have you identified story examples that have successfully bridged that space of story originality and nuanced cis black male representation in a way that has been able to obtain significant commercial promotional support?
I mean, I'm not sure. I sort of reject the thesis of this question, which is that there is a gulf between representation of cis black male, representation of cis black men, straight cis black men. Like, I can think of a ton of examples off the top of my head. I mean, I'm thinking just immediately about Get Out, right? We referenced Jordan Peele earlier. I mean, Jordan's work is pretty original and pretty exceptional, and he's a straight cis black dude writing about straight cis black dudes. Ryan Coogler's work, wildly original and incredibly well executed. I mean, I'm sorry, my brain is just sort of overfiring. Boots Riley, Peter Ramsey, like they're just sort of names that Steve McQueen.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Barry Jenkins, Beals. There's actually so much originality coming from straight cis black men, as there are from all communities. I think that there's two separate issues here. I think this is probably what the person is asking about. I think that there is, again, undeniably a history of racism that has specifically targeted black men, again, going back to Birth of the Nation, right? And one of my sort of favorite awful statistics is that, in the last 20 years, in Hollywood films, 2/3 of the gang members have been black men. If you look at the FBI numbers, that number is actually about 30%, right? So again, when we create these images about black folks, we sort of try to establish them in the public imagination as criminals. That does not mean that there are not brilliant, wildly original black straight men who are cis making great movies both within and without the system. And so I sort of reject the thesis there, while simultaneously acknowledging that Hollywood in aggregate has not had a terribly good record representing any marginalized community in a way that is any way accurate, because historically the people that are telling the stories about those marginalized communities have not been part of those communities.
Okay, wonderful. And the second question that goes into a different takes a different route. What can you say about institutions, galleries, film festivals that don't pay fees for showing screening works of artists? I'm especially pertaining to artists doing experimental and avant-garde video and film work that in the art world's current state, does it make more sense to release new work for free online? Since a lot of these platforms for experimental avant-garde work don't pay artist fees anyway.
It's a great question. So, look, I think that I think the arts space generally is difficult from a financial perspective. And I think that is especially true if you are making work that does not have on its face an audience that is willing to pay money to consume what you're making, right? And I think that experimental film, I think a lot of sort of what we consider high art film falls in that category. Though I would argue that there is tons of work that I comfortably consider high art that is also commercially viable. So I think the bigger question is, should film festivals, galleries, whoever, should they be paying artists to screen their work? Ideally, yes. But I think that there are realities to being a not-for-profit film festival, a film festival that runs on a threadbare budget, and one has to make decisions about how are we going to allow this thing to exist in a sustainable way? And maybe the decision that has been made is not to pay the artists. In a festival environment that's not for profit, that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable than a gallery, for example, that exists as a for-profit institution. And if you're drawing people in, you should probably be paying the people who are creating the content that draws them in. I've come back to this a few times, but fundamentally, I think that each of these decisions has to be a negotiation, and each individual opportunity sort of has to be specced out based on the sort of pros and cons for each individual involved. If, for example, I had a piece of work and the Museum of Modern Art in New York called me and said, we'd like to promote your work and put it on, in the museum, but we're not going to pay you. It's the Museum of Modern Art. I might take that one seriously, right? Similarly, if I got a phone call from a gallery in my hometown that was a for-profit gallery that wanted to show my work, but they weren't going to pay me, I'd probably kick it to them for free. At the same time, if I knew someone was profiting on my work, would I give it away for free? Absolutely not. So I think there's a trade-off. The bigger question, the more interesting question is, does it make more sense to just put that work online and not put it exclusively in a festival or gallery? And that's, I think, a question that the industry is going to have to wrestle with for the next 10 to 20 years. Because fundamentally, and this is the goal that I'd like to get to, what we need to do is build an ecosystem, and it's probably going to be online, where artists can make things, distribute and promote things, and get suitably financially compensated based on the size and audience and import of their work, and sort of, conserve and keep that audience so that the next time they go make things, they can have that process happen again. I don't know what that ecosystem looks like. I think we're all building towards that. I think that there are also companies like Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these other organizations that are doing that for a certain kind of film. With a certain system of priorities, but I haven't yet seen an ecosystem that really prioritizes the artists as the leading edge of that. And I don't know what it looks like, but if there's somebody out there that's trying to build it, I'm on Twitter at Franklin Leonard. I'm always interested in that conversation because I think that it's going to be something that's very necessary so that we can sustain the culture of filmmaking of all sorts over the next 50 years.
Wonderful. And one last question for you. Then I let you go and read like 100 scripts. So I'm a huge fan of the concept of beautiful failure, and especially in filmmaking. I mean, so many wonderful stories come out of like some form of failure. And I would like to tell you like an anecdote, maybe out of your personal life or something that you witnessed where like something that incredibly went wrong was super fruitful in the end.
I mean, I think honestly, my entire career is a beautiful failure, if I'm being totally honest. Look, I went to university thinking that I was probably going to be a medical doctor. I was very good at math. I was going to major in biomedical engineering. And I realized very quickly that at Harvard, there are a lot of people who are very good at math and science. And so instead, I majored in social and political theory. And I graduated and I thought I was going to work in politics. I ran a congressional campaign that we lost. But more than that, I realized it wasn't for me. And so then I went and wrote for a newspaper in Trinidad, which is where my mother's father is from, and realized that wasn't for me. So I took a consulting job in New York and realized that wasn't for me. And so I came out to Hollywood, and very rapidly I worked at an agency. I worked for a series of different production companies in a studio and realized that wasn't for me. And really what the Blacklist is a response to all of the ways in which I felt like the career that I was building, the work that I was doing was failing sort of my values, but also was failing the industries in which it existed. The Blacklist is a direct response to a market failure within the industry, and was built to solve it. And I think that every single day in building that, we make decisions, some of which end up not being the right decision, and our recovery is the thing that ends up being the beauty. But you can't get to the beauty without the failure. I've seen very, very few great things in my life that didn't risk and usually result in failure before they blossomed into beauty.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I like the idea that the blacklist is almost like a bug fix. in, as we would say, like in tech jargon. And so it was great talking to you, Franklin. I hope we can somehow stay in contact. It was great.
I would love
Have a great day.
Love to do it in person at some point.
Absolutely, we'll do that.
Pandemic times.
I will bring my European ass over to the US at some point in the future. I'll ping you. Thank you so much. Have a great day, successful day, hopefully, and hope to see you soon in person. Bye-bye.
Right.